Thank you. Thank you, Anne, for your introduction, and thank you all for coming. I really appreciate and would like to thank you, all of my colleagues and friends, especially Bosnian friends who are here, the Ambassador Swanee Hunt, and my colleague Larry Graham, Dean Hampton. And I would like to use this occasion to say something about the Women's Studies and Religion program, and to express my deep gratitude that I'm here, and to thank Anne Brody, who made this program a friendly environment, not only for me, but also for all of us last in this year. So as you could have seen, my topic is about women peacemakers in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So to be able to speak about peace, we need to refer to the war and conflicts. So therefore, I would like to say that the war started in the Balkans in 1991, when millions of South Slavs who lived in the former Yugoslavia, you could see now in the map. It's hard to find Bosnia in the map. It's a really small country, but very beautiful and important. Now you can see all of these countries that were part of former Yugoslavia, and they lived together under Tito's rule. And when the war started in 1991, they became divided by their ethnic and religious identities in the newly established countries. The greatest destruction with genocide in Srebrenica affected Bosnia and Herzegovina because its population was ethnically mixed, with high percentage of mixed marriages in bigger urban areas. So Bosnia sometimes is called Yugoslavia in small. Bosnia hasn't had majority ethnic population, as in the case with Serbia and Croatia, for instance, but it is consisted of three major ethnic groups: Bosniak Muslims, Croats Catholics, Serb Orthodox, and others, according to our constitution, which means minorities: Jews, Hungarians, Albanians, Slovenians, Slovakians, and others. Unfortunately, after the war, Bosnia and Herzegovina became ethnically homogenized and divided country, suffering from political and economic turmoil and instability. Unemployment rate today is over 40%. And ethno-nationalist ideologies are still powerful, nurturing fear and animosities among divided people. So you can see now some of the pictures from the war period. In such difficult political and economic realm, a huge traumatic experience of the war, ethnic cleansing, rape, expulsion from homes, and devastation of cultural and religious heritage, most women and men remained silent. But some courageous women raised their voices and decided to be on the side of those who have been persecuted, to help them to survive, to restore their dignity, to get proper support, and to come back to their homes. So the ethos of these women are the best reflected in the following statement: that people are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out. But when the darkness sets in, their real true beauty is revealed only if there is light from within. I happen to be a witness of the courage of these women and actively participated in many of their activities. So today, I would like to tell you a story about remarkable peace heroines from Bosnia and Herzegovina, because these women didn't allow the light of their humanity to be suppressed and defeated. They keep reminding us on the importance and sacredness of human life. These women in Bosnia and Herzegovina protected the light in the face of overwhelming destruction and hopelessness caused by the war. Their stories reveal their strength conferred by having faith in humanity, goodness, and love. Their courage to show humanity from within their hearts and souls was strong enough to keep hope alive and enable hidden and forgotten lights in other people to start shining. So they believe that all humans are mirror of their own humanity, and they inspired many to join them. But still, many in Bosnia and Herzegovina do not know much about their work. So I have been asking myself too, why these women were neglected? Who is responsible for that? So how to change this? And why me? And what I want to achieve with this? And also, what was the role in peacemaking in Bosnia and Herzegovina? What was the role of religion in peacemaking? What kind of methodology to use? And also, are women inherently peaceful beings? So I would like to answer to some of these questions during my presentation. Like many women in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I hadn't had time to think about my work and achievements because I have been busy with human rights activism and academic life. But 6 years ago, when I obtained my PhD, I started reconsidering the role of women and civil society organizations. I also couldn't find so much written about these women, except few books by Cynthia Cockburn and the book This Was Not Our War by Ambassador Swanee Hunt, and few texts in several books, but records about the lives of peacemakers were not there, so they're not visible. Having worked with these women for almost 2 decades, I knew intimately how much they invested in terms of bringing peace in their local communities. So I became inspired by the courage and creativity shown by these women in rebuilding broken relationships, restoring dignity, and standing against nationalist separatism and religious exclusionism. But above all, they created safe space for those who need support and who need a space to tell their stories. I know how many of them invested in peace, but they haven't had time to talk about it. They haven't had time to write about their accomplishments. So that's why I was academically and personally was intrigued to bring their stories on the surface. So my motivation was driven by the following facts. Usually when we speak about women and peacemaking, we know that women do the work on the grassroots level and men are the ones who negotiated at the higher level of decision making. So most of the peace work in Bosnia was done by women in local communities, but they don't have power to negotiate it. As Swanee Hunt mentioned in her book, they were absent from the policy tables, although there have been so many activities in the last 15 years to bring women and to increase their participation in politics. They still comprise only 13 to 17% in parliaments at the different levels. Second, women's stories and achievements are not recorded. They don't have time for that. They say always, you know, we need to do work, and the visibility comes later. Only few sources are available, but they're not accessible to people. So in future generations who today live in pretty much homogenized ethnic communities do not know that their next-door neighbor might be peacemaker and that she invested her life and stand for the humanity of her friends and neighbors during the war. They don't know that because they don't live together anymore. Third, women have capacity to imagine and give birth to peace and reconciliation by making local web networks. This is exactly the thing women in Bosnia and Herzegovina did. They build local web relationships and they are capable to organize anything in short notice because they established informal and formal networks that function. So they gave birth to many peace initiatives. And they saved so many lives because they simply knew when and how to communicate it properly. So they have courage to stand for their neighbors and friends' dignity. They made moral choices in the midst of human and degraded circumstances, and they showed us how to start a journey to peace. So finally, I bring positive stories of humanism and light from within. that saved lives and provided comfort for many in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And these stories can remind us to generate our own light from within. So I would like to say something why these women are neglected and who is responsible for that. And I will say something about the context very briefly. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, where ethno-nationalist politics determine everything, where being a politician is the most profitable and influential job, and where politics occupy most of the media, national and religious discourses because everything else is in collapse, doing peace work seems as realistic a goal as jousting of windmills. Although civil society organizations try to make changes and push people towards civic activism, they are challenged by the imposed collective identity matrix, both legally and institutionally. The communist ideology nurtured collective working class identity, which was transformed into ethno-national collective identity after the 1990s. This transformation kept people imprisoned within the boundaries of their ethnic and religious groups, despite resistance of many who didn't want to be put in ethno-national boxes. Secularization under socialism marginalized religion in public life, but religion re-emerged with the Vanagans as the primary marker of competing ethnic identities among Bosnian Muslims, Catholics, and Orthodox Christians, the largest population, three groups who are otherwise united by the common language, shared Slavic origin and similar culture. The public revival of religion within the newly democratic regime was strongly supported by ethno-nationalistic ideologies, which in turn fostered religious nationalism as various social groups and institutions vied for standing in now decentralized state. In such difficult and complex socio-political environment, voices for dialogue, peace, and reconciliation appear to be like early spring winds, important and refreshing, but not strong enough to bring the blossoming of peace to vulnerable people after the long winter of the war. So the next question was how to change that and where to start. In order to get sense of that kinds of stories that women in Bosnia and Herzegovina had to tell, my team and I conducted the baseline study of women and peace building in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 15 cities and provided a web survey which asks citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina to fill out a short questionnaire. The study helped us to detect women in local communities who are acknowledged as prominent peacemakers. However, out of 840 respondents, only 22% of them recognized women peacemakers, which is still low after 20 years. And out of 66 women listed in the web and field survey, the research team selected 12 of them. We followed the following criteria. The first was recognition by the local community. So these women need to be recognized by their own local community for the work they have done. The second was about the hope of activities considered and understood as peacemaking. And some of these voices, however, believed that the only way to bring people to traumatize, to bring hope to traumatized people was to show humanity, to listen their stories as best as they could. These steps included a broad spectrum of activities. Therefore, we decided for our research to employ the notion of peacemaking in these studies that embrace peacekeeping, peace building, peace research, peace studies, peace education, conflict resolution, and conflict transformation. Peacemakers in Bosnia were involved in most of these activities in different stages of the war and post-war period that transformed their approaches in peace depending on the needs and the socio-political context of their location. The third criteria was ethnic and religious and non-religious background and geographical distribution. So we wanted also to show that women of all ethnic and religious and non-religious backgrounds were involved in peace work and that humanity overcomes all identities and divisions. We could easily select 12 women, Bosniak Muslim women from Sarajevo, or 12 women from Sarajevo of all ethnic and religious and non-religious backgrounds. But we wanted to go outside of Sarajevo, because Sarajevo is not Bosnia and Herzegovina, as Washington is not the United States. So we wanted to go to other cities, especially in remote areas, to see what people do there and who they recognize there as peacemakers. The selected women live in 6 cities: Sarajevo, Zenica, Tuzla, Bratunac, Bijeljina, Banja Luka, Bosansko Grahovo, Mostar. So for you, probably it doesn't mean so much, but at least Bosnians who are here can understand that. Just to go back to their photos, these are some of these women peacemakers from several cities. I couldn't put all 12 of them. It would be too much. So when we selected 12 women from Bosnia and Herzegovina, the next question for me was, how to gather their stories, what is proper methodology, how to do that. And then I decided to employ biographical method, which uses stories of individuals and other personal materials to understand the individual life within its social context, or to describe the turning point moments in human lives, which causes us to change ourselves and our worlds. These moments or epiphanies come often in crises which alter the fundamental meaning and structure in a person's life. Their effects may be positive and negative. In the case of women in Bosnia and Herzegovina, these epiphanies resulted in positive effects and changes not only their lives, but the lives of many they tackled with the light of their humanity. By using biographical method with the life story as the key instrument, I enabled women peacemakers to tell their stories and share their personal experiences during and after the war. Of course, it was not easy when you come for the first time and say, okay, tell me your story. And they say, you don't have any question? I said, no. The next is, what I could tell you, dear. So in Bosnia, the special expression, šta ću ti ja, Bona, pričat? And then you get 70 or 100 pages of the transcript. So they had stories, and everybody has a story. But it matters how we tell it, what we decide to reveal, what to hide, how to interpret that, etc. Most of these stories from Bosnia and Herzegovina today are completely neglected. But what we have today in media are stories about war, genocide, prosecution, rape, etc. Of course, all of these narratives are important and relevant. But there is something else that have been developing all of these years, some positive stories, achievements, humanity, compassion, solidarity, and desire to have and maintain peace. Now I would like to say something about religion. So where religion stands to peacemaking process in Bosnia. My argument in the research is that religion, that peacemaking in Bosnia was not initially motivated by religion, but by the ethics of care, justice, and compassion, and by the universal human rights norms integrated into the legal system of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Although desecularization brought religion in public realm, as I have already said, women showed resistance to religioization of politics and politicization of religion, and their exclusion from the political life after 1990, when ethno-national political parties came to power. So religion was not simply a conversation starter for peacemaking at that time. It came later into conversation about peace, but only as one of equally important and relevant arguments, not the key one. So there are many reasons for that. First, politicization of religion and involvement of some religious authorities in blessing the war criminals and their silence over crimes. Second, close collaboration of ethno-national political parties with religious communities and churches in pursuing their national political agendas. Many citizens who declare religious identity, and according to the researches, they are over 90% in Bosnia, didn't want to bring religion into conversation on peace because of that marriage between politicians and religious authorities. Third, believers from religious communities, churches, and faith-based organizations haven't initiated peace activities, except few, Franciscans mostly, right after the war, but secular organizations with prominent human rights activists whose peace inspiration came from the humanist ethics and inherited socialist humanist values of brotherhood, unity, and equality. Fourth, religious authorities were preoccupied with power and keeping control over their congregations and property and restructuring their own communities after the war. Fifth, foreign donors' politics sought partners among secular civil human rights organizations and faith-based organizations, and religious communities were not considered as partners in that process after the war. So the baseline study on women and peace building, I have mentioned that's been conducted in 2011 and 2012 in Bosnia, showed correlation between peace activism and religion among ordinary people who are believers, but there is no correlation between religious communities and their leadership with the peacemaking. So religious leadership, especially those at the highest positions, do not have credibility. Religion per se, yes, but religious leadership doesn't. Some of them used religion, because religion per se was a positive force, many women peacemakers decided to introduce religion in dialogue and provide space for religious arguments. Some of them use it for psychosocial therapy. Some of them use religious ethics of care and solidarity, compassion. Some of them use it to initiate dialogue and peace across the entity borders within Bosnia and Herzegovina and between Bosnia, Serbia, and Croatia, and also to promote political and economic empowerment of women in today's Bosnia. The next question is, are women inherently peaceful beings? Because we are talking about their contribution to peace. So as many feminist and peace-building scholarship confirm, women are key peacemakers in their local communities and active advocates for peace. It is important that we echo gender stereotypes. It is not women that are inherently peaceful by dint of their gender. In fact, they can be as warmongering as men. And we in Bosnia know that very well because we had the Prime Minister of Republic of Srpska, Biljana Plavšić, who was convicted in Hague, prosecuted for war crimes. However, the forms of masculinity and femininity embedded within different societies define the psychosocial features and roles of women and men in the pursuit of peace. Due to their status of others and the social hierarchy, women in Bosnia and Herzegovina easily understood the position of marginalized groups and decided to build horizontal networks instead of hierarchical relations. Motherhood is also closely correlated with peacemaking, but as Sara Rudik warns, proper linkage is possible only when maternal thinking is a part of rationality of care, which means that a woman or mother is attentive to the needs of others and tends to be protective and supportive. However, I do not want to essentialize these caring qualities as exclusively feminine, because women in Bosnia and Herzegovina and elsewhere advocate for gender equality that includes a critique of distribution of power and the confinement of women into the realm of private and natural as opposed to the masculine realm of the public as the cultural. All of the women who were interviewed were proud of their work in local communities, and they particularly emphasized their role in the creation and nurturing of relationships. As John Paul Lederer claims that the relationship is the basis of both the conflict and its long-term solution. So women were primarily oriented to rebuilding broken relationships, restoring dignity, and creating new one with voiceless and powerless and marginalized groups of citizens who happen to be ethnic minority in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And after the war, all of us are minority in some parts of the country. They, however, recognize that relationships are crucial not only at the personal level, but also when peacemaking activities need to move to the next level, societal, institutional, and global. And I would like to show you a few examples here. One of these women is Rada, who is really heroine with a pen, because she always says, always tell the other side of the story and give a voice to voiceless. During the war, she did it, and in the city where she lived, it was not easy to go against ethno-nationalists at that time in Bijeljina. Those of you who are coming from Bosnia, and Ambassador Svanihan knows what I'm talking about, the city where we had really great war crimes. She was pretty much involved in anti-trafficking activities right after the war, and she deserves all merits that illegal houses for trafficking were closed and that criminals from that part of the country were prosecuted and convicted. So she initiated activities around the safe house, and today she's still active there and writing. So the next one is a young woman, Sabiha, who is a therapist, trainer in conflict resolution, Muslim feminist. And she also deserved merits because she was so much engaged around women who have been raped during the war. And she advocated for the recognition of rape as war crime in Hague and ICTY. So for her, as a religious woman, religious and feminist identities brought her to human rights activism. It was a driving force to her. It didn't prevent her to stay home and lament over her life, but it was a really powerful force for her. And she always says, in my understanding of Islam, humanity comes first. So the best framework for religious freedom is secular state, because she knew, as many of us also knew, what has happened after 1990s, when ethno-nationalists came to power and when they wanted to impose some of the religious frameworks over the country. Rahela is also an amazing woman who invested 15 years of her life in structural changes of education. During the war, she left for Israel with her children, but she came back because she thought that for her family, which is, as she say, Bosnia and small, the best place to raise her children was Bosnia, because she was in mixed marriage with a Muslim man, and one of her sons is raised as a Muslim, another as a Jew. So she came back and decided to invest everything and even to quit a job of the engineer to provide good education. And thanks to her and the education of thousands of children and teachers in Bosnia, we now have civic education in public schools. Danka is also another remarkable peacemaker who used to be a police officer. But in her cities, when refugees, she's a Catholic woman, and when refugees, Serb Orthodox, came to the city, nobody wanted to help them. And she noticed that they are really in terrible conditions and they need support. So she quit the job of the police officer and established NGO and started going around 40 villages in that region to help them. She lives in Bosansko Grahovo, and those of Bosnians who haven't been there do not know what does it mean. It is the place where it's really hard to imagine to live. It's a quite remote area and very impoverished area. So she's called Mother of Returnees. And she opened also dialogue between Serbs, Orthodox, Christian, and Croatian Catholics and Bosniak Muslims. But after that, she was pretty much engaged in politics and really advocate for women in politics, and they got first female mayor in his city. So these 12 women from Bosnia and Herzegovina dedicated entire their life to bring peace. And they believed that they had moral duty to show humanity in post-war period. The sparkle of light was strong enough in some women to make them guardians and defenders of their friends' and neighbors' identity. In the middle of turbulent wartime, they were against ethno-nationalist politics and ghettoization based on ethnic and religious identities, and they firmly stood against dehumanization of their pre-war friends and neighbors. For some women peacemakers, the war was right time to show humanity, and they usually say it was the time when it mattered the most. This was how they elaborated on their moral choices in the hardest time of their lives. It is also evidence that peace work doesn't begin after the conflict, but at the very moment that conflict erupts. These moral choices reminded me to one of the 11 reflections that Dean Hampton mentioned during his convocation talk, and I quote, "Living in conflict zones requires individuals to make moral choices on regular basis, and part of that is evaluation and criticism of one's own community, which is sometimes harder than anything else, to live in your small local community and to bring criticism." And some of these women really did it. Women peacemakers in Bosnia showed their courage not only during the wartime, but also after the war, where there was no need for healing traumas, reestablish broken relationships, and to reconcile divided people. They were not afraid of crossing ethnic borders, giving their hand in reconciliation and seeking for forgiveness. Deep faith in humanities and goodness made them determined to keep working towards peace. But in the end, I would like to say that these women are not saints. These women, to show the light of humanity in the time of disgrace and evil, really not saints. They are, as most of them would say, just ordinary women who stood against injustice, oppression, and ethno-national divisions and exclusions. Their stories do not portray idealized image of a woman or the ideal peacemaker, but rather they tell the tale of ordinary women with all their advantages and disadvantages, successes and failures, who bore witness to horror but choose to live in hope. Epiphanies of the light that resided inside their hearts significantly changed the course of their lives and immersed them into unknown, a journey that brought many challenges to them, but also joy and inner peace. Men were also involved in peacemaking in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but most grassroots activities, as I have already said, came from women, who tend to be the key players and peace workers. Women make peace, and men usually take the lead, the official negotiations, as we could have seen during the Dayton Peace Agreement negotiations in 1995 and other negotiations conferences, even today when we have discussions around the constitutional changes. Men are mostly involved in peace activism at the higher levels of power, where they are visible, recognized, and awarded for their work. Power relations in peacemaking are similar to power relations in other fields. Therefore, it is important to write women's biographies in order that their works be remembered not only by their domestic lives, but also their courage, creativity, and unheralded heroism. So I hope that this research and the results of this research will promote women's peace and political leadership, will teach new generation to nurture and keep humanity, compassion, and respect for others, will offer women's narratives as a tool in peace education and empowerment of women locally and internationally, demonstrate that peace work was initiated by women from all ethnic and religious and non-religious backgrounds in Bosnia, which means that humanity overcome all identities and barriers. And also to show that it is possible to find your inner voice that can make changes. And I hope all of us will find our own inner voice one day when we will need it. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. We thank you. What an inspiring talk. But we do have time for questions, which Zilka, do you want to field them yourself, or do you want me to? Why don't we start over here?
I was wondering if you could just talk more about the local web networks that you mentioned. Yeah.
I don't know if people couldn't hear the question.
Yeah. So you would like me to talk a little bit more about local web networks?
Yeah, what do they look like?
And Zilka, can you stick to the mic?
Yeah. So we don't have time to say everything what these women have done. But when I say local web networks, I mean that these women really made informal and formal networks, which means that everything what they have done to protect refugees, people who were tortured, people who need shelter, who need health, psychosocial support, anything in their local communities, they did it through their small local web networks. And it's amazing when you come to some of these cities, watching these women, how they just pick the phone and organize everything in a minute. It would be better, of course, to have a system, but since the system doesn't function, the state doesn't function, so they took over the responsibility over many of these activities. So that's why I think these local networks are crucial. And somehow these women showed that they were really successful in it. And according to the records in some of the organizations, there are thousands and thousands of lives saved simply because they knew how to communicate, how to talk to some authorities, local authorities, how to find information in a short time, etc. So it's incredible, really. But you really need to experience it to see. When I say that, it's one thing, but when you are looking for something and asking them and you see them in the action, it's another thing, really.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's a terrific talk, and many parallels, I think, you know, with the situation in Northern Ireland. I guess the question I have is that, and again, it was a similar kind of situation where one sensed in the conflict zone, in this case, Northern Ireland, your case, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that in many of these religious communities of whatever tradition, there was a great groundswell of enthusiasm for peace among women, not uniform, because sometimes, you know, women were just as much linked to the ethno-national, but nevertheless palpable large numbers of women. But somehow, as you pointed out, the power structures crush that. Somehow the religious leaders have their own vested interests, and the political leaders have their vested, sometimes they're the same people. Both I sense in your story and in the story that could be told for parts of Northern Ireland that it is these special women, not special because of their, you know, perfection, but that they are people willing to take a lead and do something, which is great, and these stories are inspiring, and will be. So the question I have is, can you think of ways in conflict zones where that broader constituency of women interested in peace in religious communities can be freed up to be more influential in bigger ways than these wonderful ways, but somehow necessarily limited because of the fewness of the people? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is. It would be great to do that. And then in the last couple of years, we have some initiatives. And the hardest part is the thing that women and religious communities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Catholic, Orthodox Church, Jewish community, and Islamic community, simply do not have women in their hierarchies and in their organization. So they are mostly engaged around educational activities, humanitarian activities, caritative work, and that's it. Another thing is that people from religious communities who were willing to be part of peace activism admitted basically that they were not they haven't been prepared for that work. Nobody taught them how to do that. And also they were afraid of to open the space for these kind of questions. And simply some of them said, we haven't had educated women to send to some of these activities, conferences, seminars, educations, etc. But I believe there are so many women since the 70s when we got a new constitution in Yugoslavia, and when religious communities were able to reopen their educational institutions, theological institutes, and cultural organizations. There are hundreds of women who graduated from theologies, and with the really small parts of education invested into these women, it would be possible to have a really powerful leaders. But also another thing is that women somehow in these communities do not show interest to be engaged around that. And we need to go back to the socialist time when we simply haven't had the tradition of civic activism. So this is something new. We need to learn how to do this. Although we had an anti-fascistic movement and we had a feminist movement, etc., but it was only in bigger urban areas, Belgrade, Zagreb, Ljubljana, and something in Sarajevo, but majority of women simply were not involved in that. So they need to be taught how to do that. And I believe there is a great potential within these religious communities, and as I said, if over 90% of population declares religious identities, which means religion really is an important factor and it needs to be employed for these initiatives. Another thing is to try to make a bridge between secular and faith-based organizations. So they are still pretty much divided, they have their own agendas, do not collaborate. Some of us who happen to be in secular women's organizations used to work there and found a space for religion there, but most of these women simply do not know how to behave in that setting, how to bring their religious identity in the public life. So this is something I believe that we need to work on and to bring together these two and to make a wider front for peace activism. I don't know, did I answer you? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the lady over there.
You referred more than once to the phenomenon whereby this socialist, communitarian, working class, I think you said, yes, identity became transformed or deformed into ethno-nationalism. And I'm curious to know how that happened. If you could, in a sense, maybe identify the process, say what interests were behind it, because it's always disturbed and perplexed me. It seems like it's very much going backwards and very quickly going backwards into that kind of now nationalism from a Marxian, you know, at least on the surface in the ideology, humanitarian philosophy and ethics. So do you have any idea how that happened, or have you speculated or studied how that happened in this particular case? Because it's not unique in this particular case.
I'm afraid I don't have so much idea about it. It's a really hard question to answer. But as I said, religion was marginalized during the socialist time from public realm, but not from the lives of people. So as many researchers showed, religion remained a part of the private lives and was transferred and transmitted by women at the time, especially during the first 20 years of the socialism after the Second World War to the new constitution, when it was prohibited to go to mosques and churches and then to be seen to pray publicly and to educate your children. But I don't say that religion is the cause of the conflict. It was not a religious war at all. If you want a proper answer to this question, we need to go back to 19th and 18th century nation-state building programs and everything what has happened after Austro-Hungary left that region, and also how the national and ethnic identity were formed for Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks at that time, Muslims, because they were not allowed to declare their national identities only as Muslim, not as Bosniak. So this is really something that is deeply connected to nation-state building and ethnic and national identity development. So, in 1990s, so the programs that have been prepared a long time ago, simply, after Tito's death, they found a good foundation and ground to develop these ethno-nationalist ideas. And unfortunately, people, because the religion was suppressed at the time, and since religion is closely related to our ethnic and national identity, basically it's overlap. So if you are Bosniak, you are Muslim. If you are Croat, you are Catholic and Serb Orthodox. Thought, that through these processes and ethnic and nation awakening, they will somehow have more freedom of religion, etc. But they were trapped, basically, into that, and especially people who used to live in bigger urban areas and didn't pay so much attention to, as Ambassador Svanihan showed in her book too. So many women and men at that time say, we didn't know what identity my friend had. It was not important. I mean, we simply were Bosnians. And overnight, it became so much important and the most important thing. So even today, our constitution is framed in that terms. So we are simply put into these three boxes we cannot escape unless we change the constitution. So you can be either one of these three constituencies or to be other and don't get anything. So this is really hard. I know that I didn't answer your question, but it's a really complex issue to be answered. Okay, so.
I'll just add one sentence to that, because I do document it, I'm swatting it, I do document it, of course, extensively in 2 books, but what you're saying right now, just Sunday I was with a Bosnian couple who's here, they've been settled here, and he volunteered to me, not talking about my books, not talking about religion, not talking about anything, they'd been in Sarajevo throughout the war. He said, when we married, I had no idea what the religious background of my wife was. And that is the story I've heard over and over. I cannot imagine in the United States that I would not know my husband was from a Jewish heritage, even though he was an assimilated Jew and didn't practice. And then he went to the Unitarian Church instead. Of course we talked about that. But it's so striking.
Yeah, it is. It is. But of course, we should not neglect the fact that people who lived in smaller local communities and in villages did really, that they knew what was their religious, especially religious identity. Religious identity at the time mattered, not ethnic or national, because villages were pretty much homogenized. So if you were raised in the village, you really knew who are your neighbors. But if you live in Mostar, like my friends here, or in Sarajevo, or in Banja Luka, Tuzla, and other cities, of course, most of the people simply didn't care about it. It was important to be a good citizen of the socialist Yugoslavia, and people truly believe in brotherhood, unity, and equality. And if you watch the video material from Olympic Games in 1984 from Sarajevo, you can see really that power of people who really believed in that concept. And I don't know, 6 years after that, everything fallen apart. So, yeah. I think this lady and Ben behind.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. The first one is that from abroad, what was happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina was like a war against women, because we were overwhelmed by terrible histories of mass rape and sexual torture to these women. So I am wondering how this changed the gender identity of this population, and what is happening to these women, what are these women doing now? The second question is, what was the impact of the international help and support to the life of these women, because I remember concerts, actors, singers, NGOs sending money, organizing events to help people there. And from Italy especially, I know more than 10 Catholic organizations who were working every day to collect resources to send to these women, to the people. And then you mentioned that the Franciscans were the only one maybe to do something. Can you say something more about that?
Yes,
Thank
I
you
will.
very much.
So 3 questions. Oh my God.
Please.
Okay, so I have to say that the rape was used as a tool for war crimes and genocide, and then it was a really powerful tool to destroy one nation. But of course, majority of rape women are Bosniak Muslims, but also Croatian Catholics and Orthodox Serb women were raped. And when we are talking about that phenomenon, it's not important, I mean, the numbers, but you know, the fact that somebody had a strategy to use it as a tool in the war to simply devastate the entire population, and it was really powerful. So I used to work during the war in 1993 in the organization that took care about these women. It's hard to talk about it. So providing psychosocial therapy for them, because many of them came with late pregnancy, and they had to decide what to do with a child, etc. So, but I also have to say that rape is not used only against women, but also against men. But we do not have so much data about that. Also, in comparison to the percentage of women, it's a negligible percentage, but still. These women were completely devastated. They lost hope. They didn't know what to do. At that time, colleagues of mine and I, working in Medica Zenica, were trying to bring hope back to them and to explain to them how to continue to live, to answer some of their questions. Is it possible to believe in God anymore after that? Why God left us to suffer? Why me? Why not other women? And all of these questions. And we were young at the time. I just graduated from the university. I didn't know how to cope with these issues. But somehow, I don't know, when you are immersed in an emergency situation, you simply don't think so much about it. You try to help. And it worked, because many women after that became successful public figures in their communities. For the last local elections, 2 of them became a part of the local parliaments in 2 cities of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So many of them continued their education and graduated from the universities. Many of them, of course, gave their children to families in Bosnia, and I would like to emphasize that a positive development, that despite the interpretation of Sharia law, Sharia law is not in force in Bosnia, but Muslims know that there is no full adoption in Islam. Many families adopted these children. They decided to interpret a religion in their own way and simply accept these children and to raise them, and today they are university students, and I'm still in contact with some of them. So when it comes to the international community, so they helped so much, but also as with any other group, that support sometimes was not channeled properly, and sometimes it didn't reach these women directly, because there were so many and between these two. But thanks to these organizations, international human rights organizations, especially Medica Mondiale from Germany, and thanks to these feminists from Germany who came in the middle of war in 1992 to open that center and to help us to take care about these women, we were able to help them. At that time, religious communities, again, didn't have proper answer. The only positive thing that came from the Islamic community was that they issued a fatwa that these women were heroines of the war. It was great, but nothing tangible after that has happened, so they didn't provide anything else. So it was a great moral support for these women and advices for families and communities to accept them, but it is hard. So thanks to these organizations, these women were able to get support, and then to get a status and domestic in Bosnia and Herzegovina their status was regulated by the law, and also the rape was recognized as a war crime for the first time in history. So it was really something. And when it comes to Franciscans, I have to say that they were the only one active in peace work before the war and during the war and after the war. But only Franciscans from Bosnia, not from Herzegovina. So I'll have a discussion with my Bosnian Herzegovinian friends after this. But this is very complex. I don't have time to get into this, but there is a huge difference between Franciscans in Bosnia and Franciscans in Herzegovina. So these people and my colleague Larry Graham had a chance to meet one of them, Marko Oršulić, were pioneers of interreligious dialogue, and they were the first one who provided a room also for gender issues within faith-based organizations. And I'm thankful to him and to other Franciscans who involved me in their work, so I was able to travel around to meet people and to do the work I did. So they really did a great job. It was a lady behind you.
Well, you basically answered my question, which was what happened to these women and how things had changed. The only thing that I really want to say is I don't think you should ever blame the Muslim population for not coming to your thing, because I think the war just devastated everything. And I know that in other countries, when devastation has come to the Muslim population, they have always mobilized resources that they could. I think they probably just didn't have the resources. But thank you very much.
Yeah.
You did answer my question.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't blame anybody, but I'm just providing the facts, basically what has happened. And again, there were always individuals, there were always imams and priests in local communities who were willing to cooperate and collaborate, and who thought that it was their personal duty to be part of these activities. And again, I mean, they were part of these religious communities and organizations, but I'm saying, you know, the leadership at the highest level could have done more, because they have all infrastructure available, and when they send a message on Friday congregation or during the Sunday Mass, so thousands of people hear them, and they could have done more.
One more thing. There's a woman languishing in jail in New York City, Afia Siddiqui, and she is Muslim. And I know that during the war that she was actually collecting shoes. She was actually trying to do something for the refugee, for the people in Bosnia and Herzegovina, well, in Yugoslavia. And through a very unfortunate incident, she was set up and she's now serving jail time. She was tortured in Pakistan and she's serving jail time. But she did try to help your people. Her name is Afia Siddiqui.
I don't know, probably she contacted some organizations. Yeah, there were so many generous people who really helped. Also, not only people in Bosnia, but people who came here in the United States to seek refuge, and they got a job, their children got a chance to be educated. So yeah, thanks to the people and their lights from within, they dared to show, so it was possible, you know, to give them a second chance and to restore their dignity. So, Hatice?
The question is about more human psychological aspect of this initiative. Assuming that these women all had losses in the war, some maybe lost their husbands, some lost their sons, and so on. When coming together, how did they leave aside their sufferings and these bad memories? Like, because they were different sides of the same war, and you know, they caused each other's losses. So how did they just try to forget this? I wonder that.
Oh, they don't forget. During the first years after the war, it was really important to bring everything on the table. So you cannot have genuine dialogue and reconciliation if you really don't have trust and if you really are not willing to reach the truth. So truth is really important, justice is really important, but also mercy and compassion and all of these things together. So yes, they didn't forget and they didn't try to hide these facts and then just for the sake of peace building, you know, to say, okay, I suffered that and you know, for the sake of the future of my children, I will simply hide that fact and then forget about it and then try to pursue dialogue and peace. No, it was a really process, very painful process sometimes. And even today, during some gatherings, you have some issues that pop up simply, and then you need to deal with that because they are also only humans. And as I said, most of them haven't had time to take a break in the last 19 years. So they haven't had time to get proper psychosocial support, to simply, you know, get out a little bit out of that context and then to have time for themselves. So, and thanks again to some international organizations, we were able to provide for some of these women who had losses of close family members, counseling and support, which is really important to be able to continue doing this work. Because every day you are meeting somebody who is in a terrible situation and experience even worse things than you, and you need to be strong enough to help him or her. Yeah, they didn't hide it. Yeah, there. Judith.
Yeah. Thank you, Zilka, so much. My question is kind of bouncing off of Dean Herndon's and the woman over there in terms of you talked about the webs and the networks, and so there are these 12 women leaders that you're focusing on, and then there are these webs of hundreds, thousands of women who make up kind of the networks. And my question is about the relationships between how women do that kind of work, and then what's the relationship between how they then understand themselves in religious structures that are male-headed structures, and what impact that may have on how they're able to move up into more influential positions. In other words, do you see that religion has an impact on how women then think of themselves as leaders? Like we see that these 12 can do that, but in terms of thinking about thousands and thousands of women who, with this transition into religious, ethnic conglomerations, if you will, how does their religion, the theology, the understanding of a particular religion as a male-headed structure impact their ability to envision themselves as leaders, or envision their church structures as changing hierarchically, envision gender politics as changing within the churches, or maybe they actually are pushing gender politics within their religious organizations?
So all of these women are coming from secular organizations, not from faith-based or religious organizations. And as I said, most of them didn't employ religion as an argument in peace building right after the war. Only after 2000 they started to integrate it into dialogue and peace. Most of them are religious. Some of them are atheists or agnostics. But they simply don't mention so much religion as an important factor to make them leaders or influential, or they didn't show desire to make changes within their respective religious communities. No, it was simply, you know, they accepted their partnership if they are willing to come around the table. But they haven't had wishes, you know, to make changes within the communities because they are aware that they would spend so much energy into that and wouldn't acquire so much. So they rather, you know, keep that energy for the work they have to do within their organizations. Because religious communities in that region are really, it's a really complex and a question, and they are quite traditional, and it is really hard to initiate any changes within that structure. So it's, I, for instance, also noticed that during the war and decided, you know, to invest my energy in somewhere else because they simply didn't want your services, they simply didn't want your ideas, they simply didn't want to deal with these kind of questions. They have something else more important. And probably during the war and right after the war, yes, they had. But these women also had the same experiences. So they simply decided to invest their energy and time into the creation of the local web networks with ordinary people, not asking anybody who is coming from which community again. I mean, so this is also really important. So it's not important that we are coming from Catholic Church or Orthodox or Islamic community. So if you are a citizen and willing to be part of these activities, you are welcome. So again, I mean, religious identity and belonging is not a prerequisite for any kind of work. And as I said, so far, none of them really showed a desire to, and they are not empowered by that identity to be seen as the prominent leaders in their local communities, although most of them are religious, and religion is important for them.
Zilka, can I press this issue a little bit further? Because you, when you responded to Dean Hampton, you explained that while there is this base of religious women who are interested in peace, that they are hampered in moving their religious group in that direction because of the male leadership structure. You also told us that there are 100 qualified women Muslim theologians, so that was a surprising data point to bring together with this other situation. Many of us had the opportunity yesterday to meet and hear from Judge Khaloud from the Palestinian territories, who told us that she became the first female Sharia court judge basically by standing up and presenting herself to do that. And I understand that, as you've been very articulate about all the other pressing concerns, but it does seem that there's this catch-22 for the religious women who would like to be a source for peace. So can you tell us, I wonder if you could approach it from the other direction and tell us what is the reception in the religious organizations of, and by the male leadership, of women like yourself who have trained in Islamic studies and are bringing religious expertise to the table, and what the reaction has been to those 100 trained Muslim theologians.
So how to frame this properly? There are hundreds of female theologians, Islamic theologians, and also Franciscan Catholics and Orthodox, but they are simply not involved not only in peace activities, in any activities. So somehow they are neglected by these communities. But women like me and then some of my colleagues also haven't had a space for activism within the communities. Once you acquire some success and offer some good ideas they can benefit from, then they will welcome you to contribute. But otherwise, I mean, and then you need to be really persistent to impose yourself. And most of these women, theologians, are simply not willing to do that. So, and I believe that the structure of education at these institutions also goes into direction to educate these women, but also to advise them that the best desirable role after graduation to get married and have children. So this is the best role you can have. Of course, this is an important role for many women, but this is not the only one. And why wasting time studying for so many years Arabic, other world languages, theology and everything else, and not being able to use it. People in religious communities from time to time show that they welcome these ideas, but they are still not so much open, you know, to accept women at any higher position. So currently, for instance, in the Islamic community, it's a process of the changes of the constitution of Islamic community. Probably this is the only country that has the constitution of the Islamic community. So, when I was in Bosnia in December, we tried to gather Muslim intellectuals to see what we can do about gender issues, to try to integrate some of these issues into the constitution, and only a few of them appeared. And there are over 300 theologians. So if just, you know, half of them appeared, it would be a great strength. But it takes time simply for these women to learn that activism is crucial, and they will not be able to change anything if they don't stand up and fight for these positions. People in religious communities, but also political parties and institutions will not offer any position for free, so you need to fight for that.
This, I think, has to be our last question. I'm sorry to say.
Okay, well, I don't have a question, but anecdotal material perhaps to add to the jewels that you shared with us in your presentation. In 1934, two Harvard classicists, Melman Perry and Albert Lord, traveled to Gatsko and other parts of Bosnia, Bihać and so forth, to collect oral traditional stories and narratives and songs. Mostly they collected epics from men because it was easier to get to men, and they could organize recordings and copy places and so forth. So they gathered songs that, on the basis of which they explained the narrative structure of Homeric epics. In that process, they also recorded over 11,000 women's songs. So this was, we are talking 1934, that are stored in Weidner's Perry collection. They have them here, and we published them just a few years ago. I was the lucky person to get to that collection. They needed somebody who could speak the language, sort out the materials, catalog the materials. I started, of course, reading them, and I was completely stunned by the beauty, sheer beauty, and also anthropological value of these materials, telling us about the lives of primarily Muslim women, but also Orthodox and Catholic in that part of the world. So I just wanted to share, I'm a literature scholar, and the narratives of women from that part of the world interests me. And I just want to share with you the fact that it took us almost 100 years to get these narratives out. So you're doing a very good job. This is a fairly short amount of time, but it, I think, belongs to the same category in a way. Yeah, so thank you.
Let us have our last question. So.
One of the women was involved in stopping human traffic. Now, what kind of human traffic was it? Was it prostitution? Was it the babies that were unwanted, that were sold abroad? And well, that's what I'm interested in. I wonder if you could tell us. And if foreign mafia were involved in it.
Yeah. If you watch the movie or read the book of Catherine Bolkowitz, The Whistleblower, you will be able to understand what has happened there. So it was a prostitution. So they imported women from Moldavia, Ukraine, and former Soviet republics to Bosnia, and they organized where they kept these women, and they simply, use them for sex, and then they resell them to other countries through Croatia. It was a channel through Croatia and Slovenia, and then to some Western countries. Italy was also a very important destination at that time. So it was a simply great business in which not only local politicians, police officers were involved, but also some international people who used to keep peace there, who were in charge to keep peace and to help people, but they were involved in these activities. And this woman, together with the dozens from her organizations and other organizations from east and north part of Bosnia, were able to shut down these houses, and also to make the pressure through media really to prosecute these guys, local guys who were involved in these activities. And fortunately today we don't have any of these houses, so which is really great accomplishment. Thank you.